Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and this is the second part of the match between Carlsen and VS Aronian from the Gold Money Asian Rapids knockout, and we've reached this position when Magnus has just played the move f6, so the f-pawn has been pushed forwards. So the plan here was to get this queen onto the 8th rank and pick up the rook somehow, but Aronian would not fall for this, so he played queen to e3 with check, and he found a way to trade off queens and get into a better position. Now, the king moves to b1, queen to e4 with check, and now the queens are forced to trade. And this is how Aronian gets his queen trade. Queen captures on e4 with check, d takes on e4, and now there's this passed pawn, but this can be stopped somehow. And we have rook to h1. And now Aronian has a very clear path of continuing from here. So he's going to continue with king to f7, and we have h6 pushing forwards. And now Aronian starts to capture these pawns, so king captures on f6, and we have king to c1. And now the only move that brings it back into a draw is rook to d8, so it cuts off this whole d-file for the king to march all the way to the other side of the board to get this pawn and to push it up to promote. But by playing d8, this boxes in the king. And now we have rook to d1. So here in this position you don't want to trade off rooks, because then you're going to get the move king takes on d1, and now from here you have a complete advantage. So the best move to play is king to f7, and now the king is going to get all the way over here, get all these pawns, and this is a complete winning opportunity for white, and Carlsen can promote his passed pawns to the end of the board to make fluffy queens. Now, going back in the position, rook to d3 was played instead of trading off rooks. Now we have rook back to h1 and rook back to d8. Now, h7, and we have king to g7, rook to h5, and now in this position he cuts off all these squares for the king, so the king is limited to this area in these boxes. Sorry, in these boxes here. Now we have rook to e8 and we have king to d2, so now the king is going for these pawns. But when Aronian played the move rook to e8, this was actually a blunder. So in this position, you allow the king to get around to these pawns over here. He thought he was going to have his own passed pawn and put it to the end of the board. But now Carlsen continues with king to d2, e3 with check, and king to e2. King to h8, and Carlsen grabs some of the pawns he can take. King capture on h7, and we have rook to b4. King to g6, rook capture on c4, rook to a8, and we have king capture on e3, and we have king to f5. And now what you can do here is, since the king is limited to these few squares in these boxes because the rook is slicing him off the board, you can get your king around and force the king up this side of the board so he cannot get to the pawns. King to d3, king to e5, so now you're going to move your rook to b4, restrict the king from more squares, and now push your king upwards so the king is forced to move away. Rook to b4, and we have king to d5. c4 with check. King to c6, king to c3, and we have rook to a5. And now Magnus is being a bit fancy here. What he's trying to do is, even if rook captures and pawn takes, king takes, now he has two pawns against one. Even though he's dropped a pawn, he still knows that he's going to win because he can still promote. But in this position, Aronian moves back to a7, and we have the move king to b4. So now the king is going after this pawn as well, because you can get your rook to this square, and this pawn will be captured, and there will be 3 passed pawns that will go to the end of the board. rook to a8, rook to a5 was played, and the last blow, rook to b8 with check, and king to c3. And it was in this position on move 66 that Lev and Aronian resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done. So even if you push forwards, you capture, then you're still going to be one pawn up, and even if you move the rook to b5, if you continue the game like this, captures, you're going to get captures, and then the pawn will take, king will take, and you'll be 2 pawns against 1. So the best move to continue from black is rook to b3 with check. You can continue it with king to c2, and then rook to h3, and that's how black could continue the game, but this is a losing position from black. You cannot save yourself from these 3 pawns that are going to the end of the board. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video on the semi-final of the Gold Money Asian Rapids Knockout, and 10 years as world #1 for Magnus Carlsen. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.